all of you to check Phil out on LinkedIn and connect. He's got if you go through his background on LinkedIn, it's very interesting. I don't know many people who have a diverse background like this and also can use the word missile combat in their LinkedIn profile. That's just pretty cool. But Phil, if you don't mind giving a little bit more of your background and how you've gotten to the point that you're at, that would be great. Just maybe 30 seconds or so, and then
Sure.
you can jump into the presentation.
Yeah. So there was in a former life, I did the ROTC thing with the Air Force when I was at BYU, and when I graduated, I chose to be a nuclear combat crew commander. And the funny thing is if I ever had to go into combat, our world would be over as we knew it, because I did it from Montana. So, but we did have the ability to reach out and touch the other side of the world if we had to. And that was an exciting, interesting time. And I actually learned some pretty good lessons while there about systems and processes and checklists. And then I went back to law school and was an attorney for several years. I've run a few businesses. My internal passion, I guess you could say, is as an entrepreneur. And so I was with an executive, a few different executive teams that took from the idea all the way through manufacturing. And then I did a few on my own. And then I went into consulting with small businesses. I'm a certified small business consultant. And then that got me into teaching, and I love teaching. I flat out love it. So I've been teaching at several different universities. The last two, University of Maryland, allowed me to teach overseas. I taught U.S. soldiers in Japan and Korea and Guam. I travel out there once a month and teach them in marathon sessions, and then finish it up online. And then most recently, I've been teaching at Utah Valley University negotiation. So negotiation is, I guess you'd say, my current passion. And the concept is so. I know that you guys are actually dealing with a little whiplash here. We've been dealing with some very hard science concepts over the last several weeks in these networking classes. And now we're going to go to something that I would call a very soft skill in comparison, negotiation. However, it is something that, in my opinion, is completely underrated. The idea that I'm helping develop a new negotiation program at Utah Valley. And the reason why I am is because it's simply, there's this dearth of understanding of bringing in all of the different applications in a business setting, whether it's marketing or sales or HR, and bringing them together, business administration and leadership, and bringing them together to actually accomplish something. And you do that through negotiation. I call the negotiation the bridge to the future. You're at your present state. You have ideas about where you want it to go. And the way you get from here to that future is through some type of a negotiation process. And you do it every day, all the time. Whether you have a 2-year-old or a 10-year-old or an 18-year-old, or whether you're in HR, or whether if you're in any type of leadership role, you're negotiating with those whom you answer to, and as well as those that are your direct reports. Those are negotiations, just conversations. And in marketing, of course, you're having those conversations with the customer, right? Those are conversations about helping them understand where their pain points are. They may not even know them. And then trying to create solutions. As entrepreneurs especially, your job is to create solutions for people's pain points and helping them get more of whatever it is they want through you. And so it's a concept, in my opinion, in an entrepreneurial setting especially, and we'll touch on that in just a minute, on particularly why that's important in an entrepreneurial setting. But negotiation is your method of getting what you want, at least what you think you want. And of course, the market then gives you a nice little reality check sometimes, telling you that what other people want isn't what you think they want. And so then you have to work through that. So the concept of negotiation, in my opinion, is highly underrated. My first, I actually was trained as a lawyer when I was in law school to negotiate. But even still, the way we negotiate today is substantially different, or at least concepts of negotiation are viewed substantially different than even when I was in law school. And it is a skill that is teachable, and it is a skill that is learnable. And if you would have talked a generation or two ago, that wouldn't have been the general concept. The general concept is either you're good at it or you're not. But we now know that, in fact, it's a skill that can be developed. And so if you have a team that is negotiating for, with vendors, and they aren't trained, you may have a series of people that are not good at it, but appear to be because they get deals. And just because it's a deal doesn't mean it's a good deal. So we'll touch on a couple things like that. So if I have my chat up, so if you have any questions as we go along, I'd like this to be as interactive as possible, so that I can kind of customize it to what your questions are, or what your needs are, versus just some ideas that I have. But until there's a whole bunch of questions, let me touch on a couple things as an entrepreneur, especially, that I think is important. Given the and if you have any questions, feel free. I'd be happy to answer them even verbally as well. But given the circumstances of the last several months and even the last several weeks, I'd like to touch on a couple things. And this is the concept of order versus chaos. So as an entrepreneur, you have to have an understanding of living in chaos. New ideas and new products and new solutions come from chaos. They come from and when I say chaos, I'm referring to that which lacks order, right? Uncertainty. You have to go into that world in order to do it. But if you spend too much time, like we've seen over the last weekend and over the last couple of weeks, if you live in too much chaos, it causes destruction. And so it's this: entrepreneurs have to feel comfortable in going into the chaos and then bringing order back out through some type of a product or solution. So number one is, understand as an entrepreneur that you have to live with uncertainty, you have to live with risk, and you have to live with a little bit, some level of chaos. If you can't do that, then maybe a different type of a corporate structure might be better for you. There are some people that, the military, for instance, you thrive in the order to go out and create specific chaos. So there, you don't get to live on one side or the other. Even when you're in an order situation, there is always some level of uncertainty. But just understand that entrepreneurial lives are lives of going to and from order and chaos. So that would be step one. Here's a couple of questions. I will touch on three. One of them has to do with mistakes people make in negotiation. I'll touch on that in a minute. And we will be touching on Never Split the Difference, Chris Voss's book. I think it's one of the best books ever written on negotiation. I use it as when I taught at UVU this last semester, it was the only text other than my own work. I'm in the process of writing my own book. I think it'll be pretty good at the end of the day. But having said that, Chris Voss's book is extremely important. So here's a couple of things about entrepreneurship and negotiation. So you go into an idea, you're going to a situation where you think you have a solution for something, and that solution is you will hopefully have some type of product market fit. You'll relieve the pain point. But understand a couple concepts that are really important, especially to you guys that have more of a technical background. It's easy to just show numbers, but we don't think with numbers. Now, numbers may be influential, but only they are so much more influential when you wrap them in the cocoon of a story, right? A narrative. Now, it needs to be true, but please understand that your spreadsheet loses a lot of impact and emphasis if it's not presented in a way without meaning and context, which is really what narratives are. And the research is really clear with regard to this. We think through associations. So we associate different ideas and different past experiences, and we pull them together. And the way that we pull them together is through stories. And so if you don't have a compelling story, even if your product is good, you're going to have a hard time getting people to buy it. And that runs all the way through the entrepreneurial and the startup cycle, because you have to go out and get get money, whether it's through an angel or through venture and eventually through private equity. You have to tell that compelling story, or even if it's, normal debt financing, you have to tell that story. You do that through through a business plan. I'm not a big believer in business plans per se, because the story they tell is imaginary, in my opinion, especially for most entrepreneurial ideas. Those are aspirational. There's really no, the relevance is questionable at best. And so, but a business plan is there to help kind of flesh out some of the concerns, whether it's, threats and opportunities and, your SWOT analysis, that type of stuff, or exactly what your funding looks like with your pro forma. So your pro forma is there to tell a story, and that's what it should do. You definitely don't want it just to be there by itself. So one of the most biggest mistakes entrepreneurs make is they don't tell the story. And there needs to be some type of a passion behind it, and maybe the reason why the founder is doing what they're doing is that can be compelling and gives context to what you're trying to do. I've mentioned pain point a few times already. So one of the next components that I would say is really important as you negotiate is empathy. Empathy is the idea of understanding where the other person is coming from. It's looking eye to eye with what the other person is actually going through. That is, in one of the ways you can describe that is by understanding their pain point, going to them and understanding where they are hurting. And then you can build that narrative, that story around that. So the idea would be, I'm looking at some of the questions here. The idea behind that is you have to go where they are. It's not enough to sit back and try to just see them, but you actually have to, the way I describe it is you have to see through their eyes what they're doing and what they're seeing and what they're feeling. And I can't tell you how many negotiations, the numbers were very similar on both sides, except the emotion of the event, whether it's a shared history or whatever, actually keeps the deal from getting done because there's too much baggage to actually to bring a resolution. And so you not only have to understand the hard data and understand the science behind what you're trying to do, but you have to understand the emotion of it, and you can't run from that. I know there are, the idea used to be, just disregard all emotion and just try to get to the, the nuts and bolts of the negotiation. But you can't. We're human beings, and the way we communicate is not just with words. In fact, words are the smallest part of how we actually communicate ideas, and but we also have to communicate feelings. And so empathy is kind of an encompassing concept that helps us understand that. So tell the story, understand how the other person is seeing things and feeling things. So be empathetic. And finally, the last thing I just touch on before we go into questions is make the ask. There was a research study done several years ago with Carnegie Mellon, and they asked graduate MBA students, so students that had just recently graduated and were negotiating their first job, how many of them actually negotiated. Now, these were MBA graduates. 53% of men did, which meant 47% didn't even ask for a higher salary, didn't even attempt to negotiate, 53%. And for women, it was 93% didn't. only 7% did. So one of the concepts that I teach is understand the brutality of your reality. And in that case, women are much less likely to ask, but when they do, they're just as effective negotiators. So the idea behind that is make the ask. Most people don't ask for what they want, and they'll blame other people. But so the reality is if you understand your narrative and you understand the pain point of the other person with empathy, and then you make the ask, you actually go there and actually ask for what you want. You'll be astonished at how many things you'll actually get. And the reason why that's important in an entrepreneurial setting is because you live more in chaos, which gives you more creativity, which gives you opportunity for greater solutions. And so if you have the capacity to make the ask, you'll be surprised at both whether it's getting funding or whether it is bringing to realization the concept of whatever your product solution is in the marketplace. And so doing those three simple things will make you a much more effective negotiator. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. So with some of the questions that I have. So let me answer some questions. The biggest mistake, so one of them is the three biggest mistakes, is definitely don't ask. They don't ask for what they want. They don't have a vision of what it is they really want. That's why I bring it up last, is because you actually have to create the vision. You have to create the solution. For instance, a simple solution is if my wife's an executive with an insurance company, and in several of the opportunities that she's had for employment within that insurance company, she has gone to, in her case, the CEO, and told them what they needed to do, the position that needed to be created, and that she was the solution, the answer. And she was hired to do that thing over and over again in her career. So you don't need to be bound by what, your current reality is, create that vision, and you actually have to see it before you can do it. So that's a simple thing there. Now, initial round funding, lacking negotiating the business model with each other. Do you touch on this? So every situation, especially at initial funding levels, are highly individualistic. So I don't want to put too much, I don't want to, there aren't a lot of continuity that you can string together and say, this is exactly how you do it. But I'd be happy to talk to anybody that is in those situations where you're trying to get some initial funding on how you can actually present it. But my point is that it needs to be a compelling story. It's not enough to just to say, here's this great product and that's enough. So, let's see. One thing that I'd say, how do you deal with a different negotiator on the other side? This is an important concept. I don't want to get political at all, but I will say, President Trump has his way of negotiating. That is not everybody's way. Now, there are I personally think that once you get past the bluster, he actually does negotiate. I mean, he follows the rules. It doesn't seem like he does, but he actually does follow the rules of human nature with regard to negotiation. But he has his own style. And if you try to think that you're going to negotiate like him, you're going to fail, because that's not who you are. So one of the initial concepts that you have to understand in order to become a master negotiator or a better negotiator is understanding yourself, understanding your strengths as well as your weaknesses. And then you can then develop some, on your, improve some of your strengths in order to bring about better results and minimize some of those weaknesses. But everybody, and you don't have to be aggressive in order to be effective. In fact, the research shows that the most aggressive as a group are much less effective than those that are cooperative as a group. Though the very tip top of those that are the best negotiators are oftentimes aggressive. So understanding yourself is an important concept, and there's not a one size fits all when it comes to how to be a good negotiator. If you are dealing with somebody that's difficult, you have to understand where you are in your opportunities outside of that. So oftentimes the reason why aggressive negotiators are so good is because the other side gets intimidated and just makes a deal to get out of the deal, or just to get out of the uncomfortableness of the negotiation. Instead, if you know what your walkaway situation is, if you know what your alternative to making a deal with them is, then when they cross that and they try to beat you up to the point where it's actually not a good deal, you just walk away. And I cannot tell you the power of walking away. Generally speaking, they'll come back to the table. The way I describe it is, and so when you're dealing with somebody who is being difficult, be willing to walk away. Number one, if that's who they are, if they're just jerks, you don't want to work with them, most assuredly, even if they're giving you money. Second is there's oftentimes a respect that's granted when they see that you're willing to stand up for yourself and your team and your idea and concept. So don't be afraid to walk away. Since most innovators and founders have strong personalities, how do you penetrate the barriers this extreme personality type presents? So, difficult and aggressive or strong personalities, I would argue, two different things. It's totally okay to, when you're dealing with strong personalities, oftentimes you want to reflect that. Now, if they see cooperation as weakness, well, maybe you bring in somebody who can negotiate in their style, or maybe you need to adjust your style enough that you can kind of create a common language, or there's a pace to negotiation. So you need to be able to adjust your pace as well. But when it comes to the core, don't run just because you're a cooperator or you like cooperation. Most effective negotiators are cooperators at their heart. So just once again, be willing to play hardball enough or walk away when you're dealing with people that kind of have an extreme personality. Is there a certain amount of time that should be established to establish rapport before hitting the pain point? Absolutely. Absolutely. So negotiating is unlike most technical matters. So you're not trying to create efficiency, you're trying to create effectiveness. Most negotiations take longer than they should. They are less efficient than they should, but that's kind of the way it is. So building rapport, in my opinion, is not an inefficient idea, or it's not a time waster, because as you build rapport, what you're doing is you're trying to associate some commonalities in your past experience. That's a good thing, because once again, you think and work through associations. So you're trying to have common associations with the other person. That's a concept of human nature, and is an important beginning step so that then you can move forward. There's two kind of general, I would call it general parts to a negotiation. And the first part is where you're trying to create value. You're trying to see how you can solve whatever the issue is. And that requires a high degree of cooperativeness. And rapport is an important component of that. There'll be another time during the negotiation, it'll shift from creating value to claiming value. And claiming value may require, that's where you it's the haggle that goes on how you're going to share these resources that you have. And so at the beginning, when you're in the creating value side of the negotiation, it's highly important that you establish that rapport. So spend the time. One other thing I would just touch on is that negotiation as a whole is actually enhanced through complexity. There's this concept that complexity is the enemy of effectiveness, and generally speaking, that's true. Negotiation is not that. You're trying to create something, and so you want complexity. Because when you have complexity, you are more likely to find overlapping interests that may give you the path forward in the solution. So don't be afraid to come up with crazy ideas to see if those may be possibilities and solutions. And creativity as a whole is an important concept in negotiation. Yeah, so somebody's bringing up the concept of being unprepared in negotiation. That is by far, when I was practicing law, I was stunned at how often I was dealing with lawyers that were not prepared. Winging it is part of the deal. And in my opinion, winging it is a good way to get a terrible deal. So preparation is incredibly important. I would say there's the great philosopher Mike Tyson, who once said the following, you know, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And that is true, but nobody ever talks about the follow-on to that, which is, and then they freeze like a rat. That also happens. And so when you plan, just understand that when you go into the combat situation of negotiation, you may get punched in the face, or you may punch in the face. And so you need to be ready and willing to deal with understanding. And if you've been in a negotiation at a high level, you know there are punches that fly, maybe not physical punches, in order to make you freeze. And so you want to be able to handle that through, but the preparation allows you to react quickly. So even though your plan is, you know, doesn't last more than 5 minutes once you start the negotiation, the plan of the negotiation, the planning of the negotiation is really important so that you can react as quickly as possible. So unspoken objectives. So if negotiation is the bridge between the present to the future, the way you build the bridge is through sharing of information. And so unspoken objections is part of that. The way I call it is it's an information dance. There's a give and there's a take. If you think, and a lot of aggressive negotiators are very reluctant to give information, but if you don't give information, you can't take it, you can't receive it, and you can't create the synergy that happens between the two. So a good negotiator is sharing information at the right time in the right amount, not so that you expose yourself to being vulnerable in a negotiation, but enough to be able to build on the information that's being shared from the other side. And so unspoken objections need to, that's part of the deal, is sensing those objections and then having them articulate that in a safe way, and then you being able to create solutions based on that. So
Bill, we're at about time on how we scheduled, but the chat is just buzzing with a bunch of questions. So I'm just going to let you keep rolling through the questions and addressing what people have asked so far. So keep going.
Well, let me touch on a few things that I'm seeing there. Number one, if you want an idea, Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference is a great primer on empathy, especially on empathy. So I think that there needs to be more of a framework than he has in his book, but there is no question you'll be a better negotiator after reading his book. The other one is somebody touches on Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman and prospect theory. And that is the foundation for negotiation today. So in my opinion, it's taught at Harvard. They have a kind of the preeminent negotiation program, and their foundation is now prospect theory through the book. Daniel Kahneman wrote a book. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a fantastic read, though it's very dense. But the idea there is we make mental mistakes all the time because we're kind of human nature. We're kind of programmed to do that in many ways. And so by understanding the mistakes you make, you actually gain a competitive advantage when you negotiate. So that's a fantastic one. One last thing, and then I'll kick it back to you, Taylor, is using lawyers to negotiate. I'm a former attorney. I believe that most attorneys they don't have the capacity to go into that chaos that is required in a negotiation. There are great negotiators that are attorneys, please don't misunderstand, but especially in the entrepreneurial space, you need to be protected by one, but I don't know that I would have my lead negotiator be an attorney unless that person also is an entrepreneur or has the ability to see through the eyes of an entrepreneur. So I'll just leave it there.
Phil, I would say if people need to drop off, they can, but there are enough questions in the chat that I would love to have you keep addressing those if you're willing.
Sure, you bet. You bet.
And we're recording this too, so if people have to hop off, we can certainly get the recording over to everyone too to follow up there.
One of the questions is there a good starting point? And by the way, if you have any comments, feel free to go ahead and just elicit them and we'll go from there. But one of the good starting points for constructing a meaningful story, one that connects generally speaking, when you're trying to create a story, it's the normal narrative that you learned in your literature class when you're in college, which is you have a problem and there's some type of kind of the hero's arc, right? The heroic arc of a conflict, and that conflict comes to a climax and there's some resolution, and kind of fill in the blanks from there. What is so you have to have some tension, and then that tension is resolved through some type of action. So, but the important thing is just don't throw out the numbers and expect people to fill in the blanks. Like that's really the point. So, what are the top two? So virtual negotiation. So when we communicate, words are a very small portion of the methods that we actually transfer information. Tone and body language. Both are actually much higher in their ability to transfer information. So if you're doing it through text or email, you're losing tone and you're losing body language. So a lot of the information, so you may have, it's a lot slower of a process. And so Zoom is a good product to be able to help bridge the gap. But in my opinion, there is nothing that replaces sitting down with somebody eye to eye for some extended period of time so that you can feel their emotion as well as just their words. Because their words can convey the exact opposite of what they're actually intending to communicate, or they're using words to actually hide their actual meanings, and they do so deliberately. So be very careful there. Women tend to be able to access empathy much quicker than men. That is totally true. They are not asking, but should be just as much or more effective than men when asking. That's absolutely true. What's the best coaching material for help my daughter overcome the 90% failure? Just help them understand they can and allow them to make mistakes. So my stepdaughter and my daughter, we have, my wife is by far a much better negotiator than me. So I'm not even the best negotiator in my family. And we have made it an explicit goal when they're talking with teachers and they're working through extracurricular activities to communicate, to ask for what they want. So most times they are reluctant to do so. And so as such, they just don't get it. So it's a matter of helping them understand how important it is and then allowing them to fail, because they're going to feel uncomfortable. They're going to feel the pressure of, being intimidated by a teacher. And don't go in and rescue them. Practice so that they can feel that anxiety and then work through it. The concept of courage and bravery is you just outlast your fear, right? So you have to feel the fear and then you work through it. So that would be my suggestion on working with daughters. And it's amazing that my daughters don't have any fear in getting what they want when they're talking to me, right? But they do when they are externally facing a teacher or dating. And we talked through that. Actually, we've talked to all of our daughters about how you interact in social settings and practice that so that they feel more and more confident. So I'm going to keep going and let's see. I haven't heard the podcast Science of the Deal. I'll have to go back and listen to that. But somebody mentions about how do you react to lawsuits being a negotiating tool. So threats and promises are the same thing. They come from the same source. except for one's a carrot and one's a stick, right? Threats and promises are where you tell people this is what's going to happen, right? You're exposing potential future actions. And a lawsuit is simply simply a threat. And if sometimes you need to call the bluff, and sometimes you need to understand that bluff is real, and you need to understand the damage that will be caused by it. So with both threats and promises, they have to be analyzed in the same way, which is what's the likelihood that actually will happen. And when you understand that, and what's your alternative, if anybody's been formally trained in any negotiation, you probably understand what BATNA is, best alternative to a negotiated agreement, which is kind of the professor's way of saying, what's your plan B? And so understanding what your alternative is extremely important, because if you know that their threat is not what they think it is, then you call their bluff and you move forward. So a lawsuit is simply a threat, and you can use threats and promises, but you better be willing to follow through if you're going to use them, or they're of no use. So let's see. I think I've worked through them. If anybody has any other questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Yeah. Hey, Phil, this is Jake. I've got a quick question for you. So one of the things I've learned in a past negotiation class is a little bit about anchoring and trying to get the other party to kind of put out an anchor point that then you can work off of. What are your thoughts on that? And especially I'm kind of thinking about this in terms of like, I don't know if you've ever seen the show Pawn Stars, but I feel like the pawn broker guys always try and get the customer to throw out an anchor point that then they work off of, hoping that they'll drop an anchor point that's maybe on the lower end, and then they work them down from there. But I mean, yeah. What are your thoughts on kind of the dance of trying to get the other party to throw out an anchor point, and whether it's important or not?
Yeah, so that's interesting the way you bring that up. Anchoring is actually a very large component of prospect theory and in Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. And research shows that we are unduly influenced by that first number. So on its face, you would say you want to be the one that lays down the anchor, right? You want to be the Mike Tyson that throws the first haymaker to punch him in the face. And I personally believe that that's the case. Now, the reason why Pawn Stars do what they do is because the one exception to that rule is when the other person doesn't know the value of what they have. When they don't know what they have and you do, then you want them to go forward, because more than likely they will underbid themselves. So Pawn Stars, that's what they're doing. They want the other side to underbid. But when you're negotiating with somebody who has a general idea, at least as good of an idea about the value of their prospects as well as yours, then my personal opinion is, and research shows this fairly clearly, you want to be the one that lays down the first offer. You want to be the one that throws that first punch.
Cool. Yeah, and then they're trying to pull you down from maybe a high anchor point that you set.
Yeah, so the idea is at what's the dance, or where are you dancing from, right? So an anchor is trying to establish the dance point. And so if you are always the one that allows the other person to lay down the anchor, then you're dancing around their point, not yours. And so if you're a master negotiator, that's okay. You can probably, and Chris Voss is of this opinion, go ahead and take that first punch because you're a master negotiator. You know you can lift it and then go. And there are techniques you can do to lay down multiple anchors that are highly effective, that are really quite simple. But be careful about allowing the other person to kind of establish where you're going to start dancing from.
Got it. Cool. Thank you.
Any other questions from the group before we close up? One from Tyler. How did you come to that number? Is sometimes a really easy anchor filter. Are there other ways that you've identified how to understand those anchor, or how to deal with those anchors? Phil? Like
Yeah,
what
the
do
way
you around
yeah.
that?
So if you're dealing with a good negotiator and they've laid down the anchor, I would I do what I can to blow it up. So you actually have to have a little hyperbole there to show that you are not negotiating at that point. You're not, in other words, look, you're not only not in the same ballpark, we're not even in the same universe. And so sometimes the only way to get that anchor to change is by stopping the negotiation, right? Either momentarily or maybe you just walk away. But if their anchor is so low that it's not even in the ballpark, then you need to, the way I describe it is you need to blow it up. And that requires not hysterics, but there needs to be some type of an understanding that that is so not acceptable that we're going to have to move on, and or here's my anchor point. But it needs to be done so dramatically that it's clear that we aren't dancing on that floor. So.
Yeah, and I imagine there could be quite a bit of time wasted if you don't do that, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Or you're going to get a bad deal, right?
Yeah.
And it happens all the time. It happens all the time where you get a deal just to get it to go away.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, Phil, thanks so much for your time. This has been fantastic. We have been recording, and we will get the process down to get the recordings and transcript or whatnot to the group. Typically, what our plan is to do that by Thursday. So we're trying to send 2 emails out a week, one on Thursday with announcements and the download from like Phil's presentation, and then another one on Monday or Tuesday just to remind you about what we're going to be hearing this week. So Phil, this has been fantastic. What is the best way for people to get a hold of you if they would like to do a deeper dive on getting better at negotiating?
My email is phil@boldnegotiator.com, or you can go to boldnegotiator.com, the website, and I've got some training material there.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Again, please